The ship was cold. Not the kind of cold that came from broken heating systems or empty space. This was a different cold. It came from the walls themselves, from the black metal that seemed to drink in all warmth and give nothing back. Kang Dae-ho stood at the back of the human delegation, his medical bag pressed against his side. He was not supposed to be here. Medics did not attend diplomatic meetings, but Commander Bayek Jae-won had insisted. "We know nothing about their biology," the commander had said. "If something goes wrong, you might be our only hope." Something had gone very wrong. The explosion had come from nowhere. One moment, the Cathari Queen was speaking in her strange, clicking language. The next moment, fire and smoke filled the chamber. Bodies flew. Screams echoed off walls that had never heard such sounds before. Dae-ho had thrown himself behind a pillar. His training kicked in before his fear could catch up. He counted breaths. 1, 2, 3. The smoke began to clear. He looked around. The human delegation was shaken, but alive. Commander Bayek was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but it was shallow. Yoon Soo-ah, the translator, was helping him stand. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was steady as she called out names. But the Cathari side of the room was chaos. The Queen's guards had formed a circle around their ruler. They were tall creatures, nearly 3 meters each, with bodies covered in black scales that shimmered like oil on water. Their eyes glowed a soft orange, and their faces held no expression that Dae-ho could read. They clicked and hissed at each other in urgent tones. Through a gap in their formation, Dae-ho saw her. Queen Vethra, supreme ruler of the Cathari Dominion, commander of 1,000 worlds. She was sitting on the floor, her back against her broken throne, and she was bleeding. The blood was not red. It was blue, bright blue, and it glowed faintly in the dim light. It poured from a long gash on her forearm, pooling on the floor beneath her. Her violet eyes were open, watching her own blood with what might have been curiosity or might have been shock. A Cathari medic pushed through the guards. He carried tools that made Dae-ho's stomach turn. Long metal rods with glowing tips, clamps with teeth like a predator's jaw. The medic knelt beside the Queen and raised one of the rods. It hummed with heat. The Queen did not flinch. She simply closed her eyes and waited for the pain. Dae-ho moved before he could think. His feet carried him across the room, past fallen debris, past guards who were too confused to stop him. He heard Sua calling his name. He heard Commander Bayek shouting an order. He did not stop. He dropped to his knees beside the Cathari medic. The creature turned to look at him. Its orange eyes narrowed. A low growl built in its throat. "Wait," Dae-ho said. He held up his hands, showing they were empty. "Please, let me help." The medic did not understand his words, but Sua was suddenly there, speaking in rapid clicks and hisses. Her translation was rough, Dae-ho knew. She had only been studying Cathari for 2 years, but she got the meaning across. The medic made a sound that might have been a laugh. It looked at the Queen, waiting for an order. Queen Vethra opened her eyes. She looked at Dae-ho for a long moment. He felt the weight of that gaze. 400 years of life looked out at him from those violet depths. 400 years of war and rule and survival. He was nothing to her. A small creature from a small world, an insect before a god. But something in her expression shifted. Perhaps it was the pain. Perhaps it was simple curiosity. She waved her uninjured hand in a gesture of dismissal. "Let the human try," Sua translated. "It will make no difference." The medic stepped back with obvious reluctance. Dae-ho did not waste time. He opened his bag and pulled out what he needed. Antiseptic wipes, clean gauze, a small bottle of numbing spray, simple things, basic things, the tools of a field medic, not a surgeon. He looked at the wound. It was deep but clean. The blue blood was thick, almost like syrup. He did not know if human medicine would work on Cathari flesh. He did not know if the antiseptic would help or harm. But he knew one thing for certain. That burning rod would cause pain. And there was already too much pain in this room. "This might feel cold," he said softly, knowing she could not understand him. He sprayed the numbing agent around the wound's edges. The queen's scales rippled. Her eyes widened slightly, but she did not pull away. Daeho took an antiseptic wipe and began to clean the wound. He worked slowly, carefully, the way his instructors had taught him, the way he had practiced on 1,000 training dummies and 100 real patients. He wiped away the blood with gentle strokes. He made sure no debris remained in the cut. He worked around the edges, cleaning the healthy flesh so infection could not take hold. The room had gone silent. The guards watched. The human delegation watched. Even the Cathari medic watched, his glowing tools forgotten in his hands. Daeho did not notice. His world had shrunk to this wound and this patient. He took a fresh piece of gauze and pressed it against the gash with steady pressure. Not too hard. Not too soft. Just enough to stop the bleeding while the body did its work. The queen had gone very still. At first, Daeho thought something was wrong. He looked up, ready to apologize, ready to back away. But the expression on her face stopped him. It was not anger. It was not pain. It was something he had never seen on a Cathari face before. Something that looked almost like wonder. Her hand moved, fast, so fast that Daeho did not see it until it was too late. Her clawed fingers wrapped around his wrist like a vice made of stone. The pressure was enormous. He felt his bones creak under her grip. The guards raised their weapons. Sua cried out in alarm. Commander Beck stepped forward, his hand on his sidearm. But the queen did not attack. She did not throw Daeho across the room or crush his wrist to powder. She simply held him there, her violet eyes locked on his face. She studied him like he was a puzzle she could not solve, a mystery wrapped in soft, fragile skin. When she spoke, her voice was low. It was a sound like stones grinding together, like thunder rolling across distant mountains. Sua translated in a whisper, her voice shaking. "Do that once more." Daeho swallowed. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat, but his hands did not shake. They never did when there was work to do. He reached into his bag with his free hand and pulled out another antiseptic wipe. Slowly, carefully, he cleaned along the edge of the wound again. The same gentle strokes, the same steady pressure, the same care he would give to any patient, human or otherwise. The queen's grip on his wrist did not loosen, but her eyes changed. Something ancient and hard began to crack behind that violet glow. Something that had been frozen for centuries began, very slowly, to thaw. She did not understand what she was feeling. She had no word for it in her language, but she knew with a certainty that shook her to her core that she had never felt anything like it before. And she knew she wanted to feel it again. The summons came 6 hours after the attack. Daeho was sitting in the small room the Cathari had given to the human delegation. It was barely larger than a closet, with walls that hummed with strange energy and a floor that was slightly too warm. He had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the queen's face, that look of confusion and wonder, that iron grip on his wrist. Commander Bayek was pacing near the door. "This is unprecedented," he said for the 10th time. "A private audience with the queen. No guards, no witnesses. She could kill you without anyone knowing." "She will not kill him," Sua said. She was sitting on the floor, her translation device in her lap. "I have been studying their body language for 2 years. What I saw in that room was not hostility. It was fascination." "Fascination can be dangerous," Beck replied. Daeho stood up. "I will go." The commander turned to face him. His eyes were tired, worried. "Dae-ho, this is not an order. You can refuse." "I know." Dae-ho picked up his medical bag. It felt heavier than usual. "But if there is even a small chance that this helps our mission, I have to try. That is why I joined the First Contact Corps, to bridge gaps, to heal wounds." He paused. "All kinds of wounds." Su'a rose to her feet. "I am coming with you. You will need a translator." The walk to the Queen's chambers took them through the heart of the Kethari flagship. The corridors were wide and tall, built for creatures much larger than humans. Strange lights glowed in the walls, casting shadows that moved like living things. Kethari soldiers watched them pass, some with curiosity, some with open hostility. Word had spread about the human who had touched their queen. They reached a door made of solid black metal. 2 guards stood on either side, their weapons ready. When Su'a spoke to them in their clicking language, they hesitated. Then the door opened. The queen's chambers were nothing like Dae-ho had expected. He had imagined a throne room, grand and cold. Instead, he found something almost simple. A large space with curved walls that glowed with soft purple light. Strange plants grew in containers along the edges. In the center, there was a low platform covered in dark fabric. Queen Vethra sat on this platform. Her wounded arm was wrapped in rough bandages, Kethari style. The wrapping was tight and uncomfortable looking. She watched them enter with those ancient violet eyes. "Leave us," she said. Su'a translated, then shook her head. "She wants me to go," Su'a said quietly. "But how will you—" "I will manage." Dae-ho gave her a small smile. "Languages are not just words. Go. Wait outside." Su'a looked uncertain, but she obeyed. The door closed behind her. Dae-ho was alone with the most powerful being in this sector of the galaxy. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The queen studied him. Dae-ho stood still, his hands at his sides. He remembered his training. When dealing with unknown species, show no fear, show no aggression, simply be present. The queen spoke. Her voice was that same grinding thunder, but softer now. She pointed at his medical bag, then at her arm. Dae-ho understood. He walked forward slowly, giving her time to change her mind. She did not stop him. He knelt beside the platform and opened his bag. The Kethari bandages were crude, tight strips of some fibrous material wrapped so firmly that the scales beneath were pressing together painfully. He began to remove them, working with careful fingers. The queen watched his every movement. Beneath the bandages, the wound looked better than he had hoped. The bleeding had stopped. The edges were beginning to close. Her body was healing itself, faster than any human wound would heal. But there was still work to do. He cleaned the wound again, fresh antiseptic, gentle strokes. He felt her scales ripple under his touch, but she did not pull away. When he was done cleaning, he applied a thin layer of healing gel from his kit. He did not know if it would work on her biology, but it would keep the wound moist and protected. Then he wrapped it. Not the Kethari way, tight and harsh. The human way, firm but gentle, supportive but not painful. He worked slowly, making sure each layer sat correctly. When he finished, the queen raised her arm and looked at his work. She flexed her clawed fingers. The bandage moved with her, not against her. Something changed in her expression. That look of wonder was back. She spoke. A single word. A question. Dae-ho did not understand the word, but he understood the tone. Why? He thought for a moment. How could he explain? He did not speak her language, but some things did not need words. He pointed at her wound. Then he made a face of pain, closing his eyes and wincing. Then he pointed at the old bandages, the harsh ones. He made the pain face again. The queen tilted her head. She understood this much. Then Daiho pointed at his own bandages, the ones he had just applied. He smoothed his expression. He smiled slightly. No pain, comfort, healing without hurting. The queen was silent for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was strange, softer than before, almost uncertain. She made a gesture, touching her chest, then touching the air between them. Daiho did not know what it meant. He waited. The queen rose from her platform. She moved to a wall and touched a panel. A screen appeared, showing images and symbols. She searched through them, clicking and hissing to herself. Finally, she found what she was looking for. The screen showed a Cathari medic working on a wounded soldier. The medic used those same burning tools Daiho had seen before. The soldier screamed, its body thrashing against restraints. The wound closed, yes, but the soldier's eyes were full of agony. The queen pointed at the screen, then she pointed at Daiho. She made a gesture of incomprehension, spreading her clawed hands wide. Daiho understood now. She was asking him to explain. Why did he do it differently? Why did his way not cause pain? He reached into his bag and pulled out his tools. He held up the antiseptic wipe and mimed using it on himself, showing how gentle it was. He held up the numbing spray and touched it to his own arm, then showed that he felt nothing. He demonstrated each tool, each technique, turning medicine into a silent performance. The queen watched everything. Her violet eyes missed nothing. When he was done, Daiho placed his hand over his heart. He thought of his sister, Yuna, the way he had held her hand through every treatment, the way he had wiped her tears and promised that he would always be gentle, always be kind. He looked at the queen and spoke, knowing she could not understand his words, but hoping she could understand his meaning. Where I come from, we believe that healing should not add to suffering. A healer's job is not just to fix the body, it is to comfort the soul. When someone is in pain, the last thing they need is more pain. They need care. They need kindness. They need to know that someone is there for them, that someone will be gentle with their wounds. He paused, searching for the right gesture. He placed one hand over his heart and extended the other toward her, palm up. An offering. A bridge. We call it compassion. It is the most human thing I know. The queen stared at his extended hand. Her expression was unreadable. Seconds passed. Then, slowly, she reached out and placed her clawed hand over his. Her scales were cool against his skin. Her grip was firm but not crushing. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Daiho heard a word he did not recognize. But somehow, he understood its weight. It was the closest thing her language had to what he had described. Weakness before death. That was their word for gentleness, for compassion, for everything Daiho believed in. He shook his head. No. He pointed at himself, at his heart, at his extended hand. He shook his head again. Not weakness, strength. The queen's eyes narrowed. She did not believe him. Not yet. 400 years of a different truth could not be undone in one evening. But when Daiho was finally escorted back to his quarters, he carried a message with him. A royal decree. The human medic would remain aboard the Cathari flagship as a cultural attaché. He would teach, he would demonstrate, he would show them this impossible concept that had no proper name in their language. And late that night, another summons came. Not for a wound this time. The queen wanted to know why humans held the hands of the dying. Daiho thought of Yuna, and he began to explain. 3 weeks passed aboard the throne of silence. Daiho had learned the rhythm of the ship. He knew when the lights dimmed for their version of night. He knew which corridors were safe to walk and which ones held soldiers who still looked at him with murder in their orange eyes. He knew the sound of the engines, the hum of the walls, the click of Cathari feet on metal floors. and he had learned that word of his work had spread far beyond the Queen's chambers. It started small. A young soldier appeared outside his door one morning, holding an injured hand. A training accident, Su'a explained. The soldier had been told to go to the medical bay, but the medical bay meant the burning tools, the screaming, the pain. The soldier had heard rumors about the human, the soft-handed one, the one who healed without hurting. Daeho treated the injury. He cleaned it, wrapped it, gave the soldier a small pill for pain. The whole process took 15 minutes. The soldier stared at his bandaged hand like it was a miracle. The next day, 2 more soldiers came, then 4, then 10. They came with cuts and burns and broken bones. They came with old wounds that had healed wrong, scars that still ached after decades. They came with fear in their eyes and hope in their hearts, and Daeho helped them all. The Cathari medics were furious. They complained to their commanders. They demanded that the human be stopped, but the Queen had given her permission, and no one could overrule the Queen. Not openly, at least. Warlord Kethsun watched from the shadows. He was the Queen's oldest enemy, though he served her with perfect loyalty on the surface. His scales were darker than the others, almost pure black, and his eyes burned with a cold orange fire. He had risen to power through strength and cruelty. He believed in the old ways. Pain was the teacher. Suffering was the forge. The weak were meant to be broken so the strong could rise. The human disgusted him, this soft creature with his gentle hands and his healing without pain. Every soldier he touched became a little bit weaker. Every wound he wrapped was a wound that did not teach its lesson. But what disgusted him more was the Queen. Kethsun had known Vethra for 200 years. He had watched her rise to power over the bodies of her rivals. He had seen her crush rebellions with an iron fist and burn worlds that defied her will. She was strong. She was ruthless. She was everything a Cathari ruler should be. Now she spent her evenings talking to a human. Kethsun's spies reported everything. The Queen asked the human about death. She asked him about grief. She asked him why his species wept when they lost someone they loved. These were weakness questions. Prey questions. The questions of a ruler who had forgotten what made her people great. It was time to remind her. But first, he needed proof of her corruption. Something undeniable. Something that would turn even her loyal followers against her. He waited. He watched. And 3 weeks after the human's arrival, he found what he was looking for. The Queen summoned Daeho to her chambers in the deep of night. This was not unusual anymore. They had spoken many times since that first meeting. Su'a had taught Daeho some basic Cathari phrases, and the Queen had learned a few human words. Their conversations were slow and difficult, but they were real. This night, the Queen seemed different. She sat on her platform with her back to the door. When Daeho entered, she did not turn to greet him. "Sit," she said. Her human vocabulary was growing. Daeho sat on the floor across from her. He waited. He had learned that the Queen would speak when she was ready. Not before. Long minutes passed. Finally, she turned, and Daeho saw something he had never seen on her face before. Shame. She pulled aside the fabric of her robe, revealing her shoulder. There, carved into her scales, was an old scar. It was different from her other wounds. This one had been made deliberately. The cuts formed a pattern, a symbol that Daeho did not recognize. "My mother," the Queen said. She touched the scar with her clawed fingers. Lesson. Strength. Daeho felt cold anger rise in his chest. A mother had done this to her own child, had carved into her flesh to teach her a lesson about strength, and the wound had never truly healed, not the outer mark and not the inner one. "May I?" he asked softly, gesturing toward the scar. The Queen hesitated. For a moment, Daeho thought she would refuse. Then she nodded. He moved closer. The scar was old, perhaps centuries old. The scales around it were rough and discolored. The tissue beneath was hard with age. There was nothing medicine could do for a wound this ancient. But Daiho had learned that healing was not just about bodies. He took a soft cloth from his bag. He dampened it with clean water. And then, very gently, he began to clean the scar. Not because it needed cleaning, but because the act itself meant something. Because someone was finally treating this old wound with kindness instead of pride. The queen went very still. Her breathing changed. Something in her chest made a sound that Daiho had never heard from a Cathari before. It took him a moment to realize what it was. She was crying. Not like a human cried, with tears and sobs. The Cathari did not have tear ducts. But her body shook with silent grief. Her claws dug into the platform beneath her. A low, keening sound escaped her throat, a sound of pain that had been held back for 400 years. Daiho did not stop. He continued to clean the scar, slow and gentle. He hummed a song his mother used to sing, a lullaby from his childhood. He did not know if the queen could hear it over her own grief, but he hoped the vibration, the rhythm, might offer some small comfort. When he was done, he wrapped the old scar in fresh bandages, not because it needed protection, but because it deserved to be treated like a wound that mattered. The queen looked at her wrapped shoulder. Then she looked at Daiho. "Why?" she asked. That same question, again and again. Why did he care? Why did he help? Why was he kind to a creature who could crush him with one hand? Daiho thought of his sister again. Yuna, wasting away in her hospital bed. Yuna crying because she was scared. Yuna holding his hand and asking him to stay. "I had a sister," he said slowly, using simple words. "She was sick, very sick. I could not save her, but I could hold her hand. I could be gentle. I could make sure she did not die alone and afraid." He placed his hand over his heart. "She taught me that strength is not about causing pain. Strength is about being there for someone when they are hurting. Strength is about being gentle when the world is hard." The queen was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, softer, almost fragile. "My people have no word for this," she said, "for what you do. What you are." "Maybe it is time to make one," Daiho replied. They sat together in the purple light of her chambers, two beings from different worlds, different bodies, different histories. But in that moment, they understood each other. They did not know that Kethsun's spy had recorded everything. They did not know that the warlord was already planning his move, already gathering his followers, already preparing to expose the queen's weakness to the entire dominion. They only knew that something had changed between them, and that some wounds, once opened, could finally begin to heal. The challenge came at midday, in the great hall of the Throne of Silence, before the assembled might of the Cathari Dominion. Daiho was there. He had been summoned along with the rest of the human delegation to witness a military ceremony. Commander Bayek stood beside him, his face calm but his eyes worried. Sua translated the proceedings in a low whisper. The hall was massive. Thousands of Cathari soldiers stood in perfect rows, their black scales gleaming under harsh white lights. At the far end, Queen Vethra sat on her throne, restored and magnificent after the explosion that had damaged it weeks ago. She wore armor of silver and violet, and her eyes swept across her subjects with ancient authority. Then Warlord Kethsun stepped forward. He was the largest Cathari Daiho had ever seen, nearly 4 meters tall, with scales so dark they seemed to absorb light. His claws were like swords. His eyes burned with cold fire. He spoke in a voice that echoed off the walls. Sua translated, her voice growing tight with fear. "My queen, I come before you with grave concerns. For 3 weeks, you have allowed a creature from a weak and primitive species to walk our halls. You have permitted this human to touch our warriors, to spread his soft ways among our soldiers. You have even welcomed him into your private chambers." A murmur ran through the crowd. Deho felt the weight of thousands of orange eyes turning toward him. Kethsun continued, "I have evidence that this human has corrupted your judgment. I have recordings of you weeping like prey. I have proof that you allowed him to touch your royal scars. These are not the actions of a strong queen. These are the actions of one who has been contaminated by alien weakness." The murmur grew louder. Some soldiers were nodding, others looked uncertain. Queen Vethra sat motionless on her throne, her expression unreadable. "Therefore," Kethsun said, his voice rising to a roar, "I invoke the ancient right of Kethval, trial by combat. If you are truly strong, prove it with your body. If you fall, your throne passes to me, and the human and all his kind will be executed." Silence crashed down like a wave. Deho's heart stopped. Trial by combat. He had heard of this tradition. The loser did not just lose their position. The loser lost their life. He looked at the queen. She had not moved. Her violet eyes were fixed on Kethsun, with an expression that might have been anger or might have been acceptance. She knew this challenge was coming. Perhaps she had always known. When she spoke, her voice was calm. "I accept." The crowd erupted. Soldiers stamped their feet and roared approval. This was what they understood. This was strength. This was the Cathari way. Commander Bayek grabbed Deho's arm. "We need to leave, now. If she falls, she will not fall," Deho said, but his voice shook. The combat was set for the following dawn. That night, Deho went to the queen's chambers. The guards did not stop him. They knew he would come. He found her standing by a window, looking out at the stars. Her armor was gone. She wore simple robes, and she seemed smaller somehow, less like a ruler and more like a person. "You should not be here," she said. Her human words were getting better. "If I die, you die. Your friends die. Your whole species becomes our enemy." "Then do not die," Deho said simply. The queen turned to look at him. There was something in her eyes that he had never seen before. Not fear exactly. Something deeper. Loneliness. "Kethsun is strong," she said. "Younger than me. Faster. He has been preparing for this challenge for decades. And you have been ruling for centuries. You did not survive this long by being weak." She made a sound that might have been a laugh. "No. I survived by being cruel. By being cold, by never letting anyone close enough to hurt me." She paused. "Until now." She crossed the room and stood before him. They were so different, human and Cathari. He came up to her chest. Her claws could tear him apart in seconds, and yet, in this moment, they were equals. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Anything. If I fall tomorrow, you will be the one to tend my wounds. No one else. Promise me." Deho swallowed hard. "I promise. Even if those wounds cannot be healed. Even if I am dying. You will be there. I will be there." She reached out and touched his face. Her scales were cool against his skin. Her claws traced the line of his jaw with impossible gentleness. "You have given me something I never had before," she said. "A word. A concept. I do not fully understand it yet, but I know it is real." She stepped back. "Now go. Rest. Tomorrow will be difficult for both of us." The arena was a pit carved into the heart of the ship. Black walls rose on all sides, and the floor was covered in sand that had been stained by centuries of combat. Thousands of Cathari packed the seats above, their eyes glowing like a field of orange stars. Deho sat with the human delegation in a small section near the edge. Sua gripped his hand. Commander Bayek watched with grim attention. Queen Vethra entered from one gate. She wore light armor that left her limbs free to move. In her hands, she carried twin blades that curved like crescent moons. Warlord Kethsun entered from the opposite gate. His armor was heavy, built for power rather than speed. He carried a massive axe that hummed with energy. They faced each other across the sand. A horn sounded. The combat began. Kethsun charged like a mountain coming to life. His axe swept through the air with devastating force. Queen Vethra dodged, her smaller body twisting away from the blow. She struck back with her blades, but they glanced off his armor. The crowd roared. They fought for what felt like hours. Deho watched every move, his heart pounding. The queen was fast, smart, experienced. But Kethsun was relentless. Every time she opened a wound, he ignored it and pressed forward. Every time she created distance, he closed it with brutal efficiency. The tide began to turn. A blow caught the queen's side, cracking her armor and sending her stumbling. Another strike opened a gash on her leg. She was slowing down. Her movements were becoming desperate. Kethsun knew it. He pressed his advantage, raining down blows that she could barely deflect. The crowd was chanting his name. Then she made her move. She let him come close, let him raise his axe for a killing blow. And in that moment of overconfidence, she dropped low and drove both blades into the gaps of his armor, into the soft flesh beneath his arms. Kethsun roared in pain and shock. His axe fell from his hands. He staggered back, blue blood pouring from his wounds. The queen did not give him time to recover. She struck again and again, her blades finding every weakness, every gap. It was brutal and efficient and utterly without mercy. Kethsun fell to his knees. Then he fell to the sand. The arena went silent. Queen Vethra stood over her enemy, her chest heaving, her body covered in wounds. She raised one blade for the killing blow. Then she stopped. She looked up at the crowd, at her people, at the humans in their small section, at Deho. She lowered her blade. "This one will live," she said, her voice carrying across the silent arena. "Not because he deserves mercy, but because I choose to give it, because I have learned that strength is not only about taking life, it is also about preserving it." She turned away from Kethsun's broken body and walked toward the gate. She made it 3 steps before her legs gave out. Deho was running before anyone could stop him. He crossed the sand, dropped to his knees beside her, and opened his bag with trembling hands. The queen looked up at him. Her violet eyes were dim with pain, but she managed a small smile. "You came," she whispered. "I promised," he said. And there, in the center of the arena, before the eyes of thousands, the human medic began to tend the wounds of the Cathari queen. Gently, carefully, without causing any more pain. The crowd did not cheer. They did not jeer. They simply watched in silence. Something was changing in the Dominion, and it had started with a single act of kindness. The queen healed slowly. Her wounds were severe. The Cathari medical team wanted to put her in a regeneration chamber to burn and force her body back to health. She refused. She would heal the human way, Deho's way. It took longer. It was less efficient. But for the first time in her 400 years of life, healing did not feel like another battle. It felt like rest. Deho visited her chambers every day. He changed her bandages, cleaned her wounds, and applied the medicines from his dwindling supplies. Commander Beck had requested more medical kits from the human ship, and they had arrived within days. The first shipment of human medicine ever delivered to a Cathari vessel. The Dominion was changing. Deho could feel it in the air, see it in the eyes of the soldiers who passed him in the corridors. Some still looked at him with hatred, but others nodded in respect. A few even bowed their heads, a gesture he had never seen a Cathari make to anyone except their queen. Word of the trial had spread across the fleet, then across the sector, then across the entire Dominion. The queen had won through strength, yes, But she had shown mercy when mercy was unexpected. And then she had been healed by a human, in full view of thousands, without screaming, without pain, without the brutal tools of Cathari medicine. Questions were being asked, dangerous questions, questions that had not been spoken aloud in centuries. What if there was another way? 2 weeks after the trial, an assassin came for Daiho. It happened in the corridor outside his quarters. He was returning from the Queen's chambers, tired but satisfied. The day's healing session had gone well. Her leg wound was closing nicely, and the gash on her side showed no signs of infection. He did not hear the assassin approach. The Cathari could move in perfect silence when they wanted to. The first warning he had was a flash of movement in the corner of his eye and the whisper of a blade cutting through air. He threw himself sideways. Instinct, nothing more. The blade missed his throat by centimeters and carved a line of fire across his shoulder instead. He hit the floor and rolled. His attacker was already coming again, a Cathari in unmarked armor, eyes blazing with fanatical hatred. One of Keth's son's loyalists, probably. Someone who blamed the human for their master's defeat. Daiho had no weapons, no combat training beyond the basics required for field medics. He scrambled backward, his injured shoulder screaming with pain, knowing he had seconds to live. The assassin raised his blade. Then the Queen was there. She came out of nowhere, a blur of silver and violet. Her wounds were not fully healed. Her body was still weak. But she moved with the speed and precision of a predator, and her claws found the assassin's throat before he could turn to face her. The kill was instant, clean, final. The assassin's body crumpled to the floor. Queen Vethra stood over it, breathing hard. Blue blood dripped from her claws. Her eyes were wild with an emotion Daiho could not name. "You are hurt," she said. Daiho looked at his shoulder. Blood was seeping through his shirt, red and bright, human blood. It looked so different from hers. "It is not deep," he said. His voice was steadier than he felt. The Queen knelt beside him. Her claws, still wet with the assassin's blood, hovered near his wound. She was trembling. He had never seen her tremble before. "I will heal you," she said. Daiho blinked. "What?" "You healed me. Many times. Now I will heal you." She did not wait for permission. She tore a strip of fabric from her own robe and pressed it against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Her movements were clumsy. Her claws were not made for gentle work. She pressed too hard, then too soft, then too hard again. But she did not stop. She did not give up. "Bandages," she said. "In your bag. Show me." Daiho opened his medical bag with his good hand and pulled out what she needed: antiseptic wipes, gauze, tape. He talked her through each step, guiding her clawed hands as they worked on his wound. It hurt. Her claws were sharp, and she did not know how to be gentle yet. She was learning, but learning took time. But Daiho did not complain. He watched her face as she worked. He saw the concentration there, the determination, the fear of doing it wrong. He saw something else, too, something that made his heart swell with an emotion he could not name. She was trying. For him. She was trying to be gentle. When she finished, the bandage was crooked. The tape was stuck in the wrong places. It was the worst wrapping job Daiho had ever seen. It was also the most meaningful. "Good," he said softly. "Thank you." The Queen looked at her work. Then she looked at him. Something broke behind her violet eyes. Something that had been frozen for centuries finally shattered. "I was afraid," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "When I saw him with the blade, when I saw your blood, I felt something I have not felt since I was young. I felt afraid to lose someone." She touched his face. Her claws carefully folded back. "My species does not bond. We do not form connections. We use each other, serve each other, rule each other, but we do not love." She paused. I thought I did not love. Daiho reached up and covered her hand with his own. What changed? You did. When you touched my wound that first day, something inside me cracked. Something I did not know was there. She closed her eyes. I do not wish to repair it. I do not want to go back to what I was. I want to be whatever I am becoming. They sat together in the corridor, surrounded by the evidence of violence. The assassin's body, the blood on the floor, the ship humming around them like a living thing. None of it mattered. In that moment, only they existed. Two beings from different worlds, different bodies, different histories, but somehow, impossibly, the same heart. Commander Bayek arrived an hour later with news. Earth's government wanted to formalize the alliance. Human ambassadors would be sent, trade agreements would be signed, medical missions would be established across Cathari worlds. But there were conditions. The human delegation had to return home, including Daiho. The Queen listened to the translation without expression. When Beck finished speaking, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said something in Cathari, a single word, a word that made Sua's eyes go wide. She refuses, Sua translated. She agrees to everything, the ambassadors, the trade, the missions, everything except one thing. What thing? Commander Beck asked. Sua looked at Daiho. You. She refuses to let you leave. The negotiations took 3 days. In the end, a compromise was reached. Daiho would stay aboard the Throne of Silence as the first official human medical ambassador to the Cathari Dominion. He would oversee the establishment of medical missions. He would train Cathari healers in human techniques. He would be the bridge between two civilizations. And he would remain at the Queen's side. On the night before the human delegation departed for Earth, Daiho sat with Vethra in her chambers. The purple light was soft. The strange plants swayed in an artificial breeze. Everything was peaceful. I have been thinking, the Queen said, about what you told me, about your sister, about holding her hand as she passed. Daiho nodded. Yuna's memory still hurt, but it was a clean pain now, a scar that had healed properly. My people do not mourn, Vethra continued. When we die, we are forgotten. Our names are erased. Our deeds become the property of our successors. There is no grief because there is no love. She turned to face him. I do not want that anymore. When I die, I want someone to remember me. I want someone to hold my hand. I want to be mourned. She paused. I want to love and be loved, even if it means I will grieve when it ends. Daiho took her hand. Her scales were cool against his skin. Her claws curved carefully around his fingers. That is the bravest thing I have ever heard anyone say, he told her. It does not feel brave. It feels terrifying. That is how you know it is real. They sat together in the purple light, two beings who should never have understood each other, two hearts that had somehow found the same rhythm. Tomorrow, everything would change. The alliance would begin. The missions would launch. Two civilizations would start the long, difficult process of learning from each other. But tonight, there was only this: a human and a queen, a wound and a bandage, a moment of peace before the storm, and a feeling that neither of them had a word for yet. But they would find one, together.